Hey there, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jessica Hendricks. I'm the State Policy Director at the Alliance for Affordable Energy. And what we were hoping to do tonight was do a little bit of a teach-in on the Louisiana Public Service Commission. We have a little bit of a small group here, so we might be able to manage some questions as we go along in the chat. If you just want to kind of put it in the chat. And if we can't address them immediately, we will definitely follow up at the end. Because it is a small group and we have a whole hour, I'm hoping that we can get some good conversation here around what the Public Service Commission is. So here's kind of the intro slide. It's frequently referred to as the LPSC, Louisiana Public Service Commission. So that's the acronym you're going to be seeing frequently throughout this presentation. I'm going to try to get rid of all of my acronyms for the next hour, but feel free to flag it if I overlook something. So here's kind of who they are. The Public Service Commission, I'm sure plenty of folks have heard us talk about the Public Service Commission pretty frequently. There's 5 elected commissioners from these districts. So the map that you'll see on the right is actually a little different than what we've shown in the past. This is the updated map following the redistricting. So you'll see the red circles, and that's where things have changed a little bit. You can see District 4 has expanded a bit, and then there was some redistricting around the Baton Rouge area, which includes multiple districts. So that matters because the commissioners need to live in those districts. As of right now, all of the commissioners do, as far as I understand it. But moving forward, it's something to consider, kind of the redistricting for this fall election. So they serve 6-year terms with a 3-term limit, 3-term limit. So that can add up to be about 18 years, which makes these very, very powerful positions and something to not be taken lightly. It's also worth noting that the term limit is relatively new. So there's a couple of commissioners there that will serve much longer than 18 years because their first few terms have been kind of grandfathered in. Another piece is each commissioner has his own staff, and these offices vary significantly. One thing that's interesting about the Public Service Commission in Louisiana is that these commissioners are significantly underpaid compared to their counterparts in neighboring states. So this is regularly referred to as almost a part-time job, or for folks that are retired or independently wealthy, which creates a really interesting dynamic amongst the commissioners. Whether it's a hobby or something they can't devote their full attention to. Some commissioners give their staff a lot of leeway on that and kind of empower their chief of staff to take the reins. Others do not. So it's something that's important around kind of who is that leader for change in these commission offices. When we talk about the Public Service Commission, it also includes dozens of in-house staff. There is their own kind of legal counsel at the Public Service Commission. And there's also administrative law judges, and they hear a lot of some of these litigated cases, which we'll talk about a little later. A few other pieces to note about the commission, which is unique for Louisiana, is that they can accept campaign contributions from the utilities that they regulate. So there's some lax ethic rules there that are something to pay attention to. And this office is often considered as kind of a stepping stone for higher office. We've had quite a few governors come out of the Public Service Commission, meaning, they're able to build up their kind of campaign war chest and their voting history to move on to governor. So it's a big seat, and it's something that we need to fully engage with. This is kind of the commissioners listed. So we've got the 5 of them. Just to run through it, we've got Eric Spermetta, which is District 1. So that's Jefferson Parish, Plaquemines. The map's a little small. I'm not sure if you can see it. But he kind of takes over that toe of the boots. He has not historically been friendly to a lot of our causes, and someone that has a lot of experience and a lot of intelligence with the Public Service Commission. Craig Green is one who's really engaged at the Public Service Commission. He's got Lafayette, Baton Rouge area, and he works multiple jobs, but is really kind of a champion on renewable energy, and something that I think is important to note in terms of engaging with the Public Service Commission. Lambert Boissier is District 3, so he's New Orleans and then up the river parishes into parts of Baton Rouge. He is one of the two Democrats on the Public Service Commission. Mike Francis has the heel of the boot, and he's a businessman. He's really interested in how we can kind of make this work from a business angle. His background is in oil and gas, but also understands the business economy. And then Foster Campbell is the top. So he has Shreveport, Bossier City, also Democrat. Many folks are familiar with Foster Campbell. He's been around for a while, ran for US Senate. Another Democrat who's very much into renewable energy and making sure that we can kind of keep Louisiana's coastline, even though that's not quite his district. So historically, and this is still the case, we have kind of 2 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and there's kind of 2 on one side, 2 on the other, and then there's the swing vote. And that's kind of where we continue to stand to this day. One thing I'll note, and we can talk about this a little later too if folks are interested, but these votes obviously matter. But what really matters in doing Public Service Commission work is finding that commissioner to champion the rulemaking or champion the decision. Votes are usually decided prior to LPSC meetings. So we want to make sure that we have that commissioner and the commission staff to really push through good policy. So why is the LPSC important? It's important for multiple reasons. First and foremost, utility rates. They set the utility rates per kilowatt hour for the investor-owned utilities. We have 3 of them: Entergy Louisiana, SWEPCO, which is Northern Louisiana, and then CLECO. So that's the North Shore and over into kind of the, I want to say Alexandria. It's going to be a little confusing, but over in that area, Alexandria is a municipal utility, so it's not under LPSC jurisdiction. But over in Bunkie area is where kind of CLECO has their headquarters. There's also, I think, 11 cooperative utilities, and they serve rural Louisiana. And the Public Service Commission regulates those co-ops as well, a little differently, but still sets the rates. So that's your per kilowatt hour charge, but they also deal with the bill impacts. So we've had a series of very busy hurricane seasons the past few years, and those costs are coming due. So the LPSC determines what costs were incurred prudently and how they will be recovered from customers. Similarly with other riders, whether that's an interruptible tariff for large industrial customers, energy efficiency, and other demand response programs, the Public Service Commission will look into the prudency of those and how those costs can be recovered. The next thing is the resource addition. So this is kind of generating resources. Obviously, we need something to keep our lights on, and the LPSC is going to either approve that new gas plant, approve the new solar farm, approve a wind farm, and really dive into kind of whether that is a utility-owned facility or if that is a power purchase agreement, a PPA, and that kind of what the scope is. Again, many folks are familiar with part of MISO. We'll talk about this a little later. But there's also an option to go to the market. And I think this is really important to identify kind of where we get our power from and know that the LPSC makes those decisions. When we mentioned energy efficiency programs. So this is a rulemaking that's currently at the LPSC, and the commissioners and the LPSC staff, as well as the commission staff, are working on developing those rules. Again, as I mentioned, we have, certain votes. We know how folks are going to vote on this, but what we want to make sure is that we get a really good rule on the table. Number 4, residential rooftop solar. This is something that has been around for decades and had a pretty big, vibrant fight at the LPSC a couple of years ago around the value residents get for their rooftop solar. So in the past and in New Orleans, if you have a residential rooftop solar and you put a kilowatt hour onto the grid, kilowatt hour that you do not use, that you produce, you get full retail rates for those. At the state level, unless you installed your solar panels prior to 2019, you do not. You get avoided cost. This can be changed, and it is set to be revisited, I think, in about 15 years now. But there's a lot of interest in kind of reopening this, and this is something people get really passionate about because investments aren't going to pencil out in the same way that they had anticipated. You invest in rooftop solar under a certain agreement, and then the rules change. It undermines your investment. This also expands a little bit to community solar. Community solar has been lumped into the net metering rulemaking, and we'll get into that later. So this is an interesting one around eminent domain as it pertains to intrastate pipelines. This is something that the LPSC has not taken a whole lot of action on in the past, but they do have the authority to enact eminent domain for intrastate pipelines, so something that does not cross state lines. This could be of interest in carbon capture and sequestration, as so we build out kind of pipeline infrastructure and storage infrastructure. This is something that the Public Service Commission can take a stance on, especially around the eminent domain issue. And I know we talk a lot about electricity and gas and energy usage, but it's also really important to recognize that the Public Service Commission regulates some water and telecommunication and intrastate transportation, not just pipelines. So talking about expanding broadband to rural areas, talking about water rates for some of the larger water utilities, as well as some intrastate transportation, whether that's a shuttle between New Orleans to Baton Rouge, can't wait for it to happen, or moving companies, things like that. There is some jurisdiction outside, there's a lot of jurisdiction outside of just the energy utilities. So here's where things get a little interesting, is the Climate Initiatives Task Force and the LPSC. So over the past few years, it's almost felt like these two have been a little siloed, with the Climate Initiatives Task Force happening in this other room with kind of their working groups, their advisory committee, things like that, and the LPSC, hashing out hurricane recovery costs, COVID recovery costs, and new wind and solar farms. But the reality is that these are going to have to come together and work together, because many of the recommendations coming out of the Climate Initiatives Task Force are going to need to be addressed by the LPSC if we want to see any action on them. I listed a few. This is not an exhaustive list because there's many, and the LPSC is very protective of their jurisdiction. So if it's something that they want to take up, they can push for it, and if it's something that they do not want to address, then they can ignore it. And this is why this teach-in is so important, is because we need a lot of energy at the Public Service Commission to make sure that we are pushing for what we want and make sure that we get a draft rule that is really important. So just to touch on a couple of these, a renewable portfolio standard, I'm sure many folks are familiar with that. What that is, it's the regulator telling the utility a certain portion of your energy needs to come from renewable sources. And then the regulator usually defines what that is, whether that's wind, solar, whether that includes nuclear, what value local sources get to create a REC market. There's a whole lot of things here. And I know a lot of folks on the call recently had a major victory in New Orleans with the Renewable and Clean Portfolio Standard. So this would be a directive to all of the utilities, not just Entergy, but to all of the utilities in the state to develop a certain percentage of renewable power. And a few things to look out for in that is, that can create a REC market. And a REC is a renewable energy certificate market, which would kind of build into or go into that kind of like net zero that folks are talking about. But it would allow for renewable energy to be bought and sold on the market. And if we do have a local carve out, that really helps Louisiana's solar market, especially, and even some wind, creating a pathway for offshore wind in Louisiana to make sure that a certain percentage of the power is generated locally. An energy efficiency resource standard is, you have to get this much power from energy efficiency. A lot of states, especially in the Northeast and Midwest, have this, mainly cold weather states. But as the climate heats up, I think it's something that's really important in the South as well. Increased grid resiliency is another one the Public Service Commission is currently taking up. What does that mean? Does that mean mini gas-powered peaker plants? Does that mean solar plus storage and microgrids? We talked a little bit about community solar and net metering. The retirement, I skipped over that one, the retirement of coal and inefficient natural gas generation. The Climate Initiatives Task Force wants this stuff to be retired. We know it's really polluting and a big contributor for greenhouse gases, not to mention fence line pollution of environmental justice communities. Basically what happens right now is the utilities project how long the plant is going to be used and useful, and then set that retirement schedule. So it's not always based on a cost-effective model, let alone a climate model. And there's some planning decisions that can be changed to update those policies, which is very similar to kind of the next one, jumping around, but utility resource planning to prioritize renewable generation and plan for offshore wind. As many folks are probably aware, the utilities develop a integrated resource plan, an IRP, and this is kind of where they forecast energy need for the next 20 years and how they're going to meet that energy need. There's a couple of roadblocks in that. We always push for demand side management, including energy efficiency, to compete on a dollar for dollar basis with new gas plants, and we need to make sure that that happens. There's also some updated resource planning policies that can be enacted to ensure that they are competing on a dollar for dollar, and that the utilities don't have an opportunity to kind of put their finger on the scale. And what I mean about that is, frequently we'll see utilities wanting to build their own power plants. They say, they have more control over it, and there's better reporting requirements there. But many folks are aware that means that they also earn a return on equity on that power plant, an ROE. We often find that power purchase agreements, or PPAs, are far cheaper and allow solar to kind of penetrate the market in a much stronger way. So we want to make sure that these resources, whether it's energy efficiency or demand response, wind, solar, are competing on a full dollar for dollar basis with other fossil fuel generation. Electric vehicles, this one's going to be exciting. The Public Service Commission has opened up a rulemaking on electric vehicles, and I think that's something that is going to be really important to watch. Same with green tariffs, so that's ongoing. And another one that I added here we talked about is kind of the interstate transit. What is that going to look like in terms of shuttles and buses between major US cities, and some forms of public transportation that the Public Service Commission would oversee. So I want to just kind of be very clear that a lot of this is on the state level. So if you're thinking kind of New Orleans or city buses, that's not quite in the purview. But all of this is kind of statewide. So kind of thinking about the broader picture. So there's a process at the Public Service Commission. And I can put this in the chat once I stop screen sharing. I was going to put the link to our website on here, but I knew people wouldn't be able to access it from a PowerPoint. But there is a process, and we have it outlined on our website of how to engage at the Public Service Commission. So this is a little different than your standard kind of city council. This is, kind of a more formal process where many of the involved parties are lawyers or technical experts. And I think that's a huge barrier to some of the public engagement, because you don't have to be. I put here on the right-hand side kind of the stakeholder definition, and anybody really is a stakeholder in any of these proceedings and can engage in any of these proceedings. So basically what happens in terms of how a rule comes about, say a renewable portfolio standard, is the Public Service Commission would open up rulemaking. And that would just take a directive from any one of the commissioners to open up a rulemaking. And that then becomes a collaborative process with multiple opportunities for written comment from any of the stakeholders. These dockets are published in the official bulletin and open for intervention. Usually it's on a 25-day intervention period. Sometimes it's a 15-day intervention period. It'll be noted in the bulletin. And you can intervene in any of those dockets. If you miss the deadline, you can also intervene out of time, which is much more acceptable in a rulemaking. I've never seen any problems with that. This is designed as a collaborative process, as previously mentioned. So they'll get kind of the rule, and then you can comment on it. Then there will be another draft rule with another round of comments. Sometimes some technical conferences involved in between, where you can voice your concerns and hear the concerns of other parties. The other common application is a U-docket. And this is where the utilities would file an application for a new gas plant, a new solar farm, a change in rates, updated tariffs or riders for some of their large industrial customers. And these are usually litigated proceedings. They frequently settle, but there's some real big opportunities to get some good things out of those settlement conversations. You can also file discovery requests, which are great ways to get more information around of the costs, the value, and the benefits, and that can kind of shape your stance. Beyond that, then there's a kind of testimony filed in those U dockets, and that's when you do start needing to explore kind of expert witness potential and bringing in somebody to file that. Another thing I'll just kind of throw out there is the Alliance usually intervenes in almost all of these dockets. So if there's one in particular that you have questions on, or if you want to kind of sign on or submit a letter of support, that's something that we do regularly with other allies. Namely, housing advocates have gotten really engaged in some of these dockets because there's a good overlap there. So if you don't have the capacity to be a full intervener, but want to, collaborate with the Alliance to put a statement in, feel free to reach out. Again, if you're not quite ready for intervener status, there is also interested party status. And that's where you basically just say that you're interested. I like to say that you're signing up for the email list, and you'll get signed up for the email list, but you'll get all of the dockets, all of the information filed into that docket, whether that's discovery or request for information. You'll see the testimony, application, and you'll get notice for status conferences and technical conferences on these. What's really exciting is because of COVID, the ongoing pandemic, but also people's sort of more increased comfortability with Zoom, a lot of these are now virtual, which makes it a lot more convenient for working folks or folks that can't get to Baton Rouge on a Tuesday for a 5-minute meeting. So that's something to look out for. Again, as many folks are probably aware, the LPSC meetings are also being streamed on YouTube, so you can kind of follow along there, and they're working on an online public comment similar to New Orleans. So that's another way to engage if you can't make it there in person. So here's kind of what's going on right now, the most pressing issues. The integrated resource planning. So all 3 of our investor-owned utilities are in the process of their IRPs right now. Entergy had its first stakeholder meeting a few weeks ago, and I just noticed CLECO on the North Shore is planning one for late March. This is where they come with all of their assumptions regarding energy need for the future, the costs of natural gas, costs of solar, and kind of how those trends are going to progress in the future. So this is a really great way to get introduced to the LPSC and the process here. I left this off of the previous slide, but these would be filed as I dockets, and they're filed once every 4 years, 4 years at the LPSC, 3 at the City Council. These usually take about a year and a half to complete, and you can engage at multiple levels within the IRP, even if it's just asking questions or raising concerns around forecasts on the IRPs. We have, again, had a busy storm season, so there's nearly $5 billion in storm costs. So bills are going to go up significantly. And that's something that the commission is paying attention to, because one of the things they've always said is we've got the lowest rates in the country. And although that may be true, it's getting less and less true every year as these rates continue to go up. We're seeing the very real bill impacts from climate change already hitting our utility bill with some of these storms. This also includes the winter storm Uri from last year, almost a year ago. caused significant damage and some power outages, and those costs have been lumped into these storm costs with hurricanes Laura, Delta, Zeta, Ida, Uri. So it's something to kind of continue to look towards and to push for energy efficiency and more resiliency. And then brings me to the energy efficiency. You can't join an alliance meeting without hearing about energy efficiency. But this is something that's really important in kind of keeping bills down and lowering bills as the rates go up, as we've got increased costs from storm damage. You're also you can offset that with robust energy efficiency programs. And that can include things like rebates for window upgrades, HVAC tune-ups. It can also include weatherization, insulation for homes. We can kind of dig deep into the policy angle to make sure that it's a good policy and accessible to people like renters, no cost upgrades for low income folks, things like that. And this is really important for the resiliency piece as well, because we know, if the power goes out, people are going to be a lot more comfortable in their homes for longer if they're energy efficient. So if, we've got a winter storm coming and the home is insulated, the house is going to stay warmer for longer. And that's really important. That can be life and death for a lot of folks, as we saw last year. Energy efficiency can also offset the need for new power generation, whether that's fossil fuel or renewable. Energy efficiency is going to be the lowest cost resource if we just don't need to generate that power. And then back to kind of the storm piece, this is something that's really important as people are rebuilding, that they have access to rebates that could allow them to upgrade appliances to Energy Star models and things like that. So it's really important to kind of finalize those rules, make sure that they're easy to understand and accessible to folks that really need that. And then kind of looking ahead, these are more kind of long-term things on the table that are something to be paying attention to on the radar of folks. I mentioned the resiliency. The Public Service Commission has opened 2 rulemakings on resiliency. One is examining, how the grid performed, and the other is kind of identifying best practices. And this is where conversations around microgrids and solar plus storage can be had in a robust way. We want to make sure that this is not just, let's buy everybody a gasoline powered generator, but that we're looking at creative solutions that are accessible to everyone and protect the most vulnerable populations. Electric vehicles. This is a new rulemaking, one that I am actually pretty excited about. There's been quite a bit of back and forth around the hired consultant, so it has yet to really get off the ground. And if you want to know the drama, we can talk offline about that. But the LPSC is going to develop some rules for electric vehicles, and I think this is a really great opportunity to engage to make sure that they're equitable. We don't want just kind of charging stations in the wealthy neighborhoods at the Whole Foods. We want to make sure that they are at public libraries and that they are accessible to renters. And we want to make sure that people are paying a fair rate for the kilowatts that they're using. This can also expand to demand response. I've talked a little bit about demand response, and I don't know if I've actually defined it, but that's kind of more is a way to use electricity in a smarter way. So an example of demand response with electric vehicles would be, in a time where demand for energy is really high. Take last year's winter storm, for example, when everybody was running their heaters. People could actually plug their vehicles into the grid and sell their power back, similar to a solar array or a net metering. Obviously, we've got a lot of work to do around those tariffs and developing that. but there is an opportunity to really use the battery in your electric vehicle for grid resiliency as well. And those are conversations that can be had in this electric vehicles rulemaking. Again, this is a big opportunity to get some good rules in place, but make sure that the commission does not kind of restrict its growth, and make sure that we are fostering a electric vehicle economy for the state of Louisiana. And the next one, customer-centered options. So this is a big one. I'm glad we've got a little bit of time here. But customer-centered options is really forward-looking. So don't get too excited about it yet, but it's something to pay attention to. And this would examine deregulation of the market in Louisiana. And so what that means is right now your utility provider, your electric utility provider, is based solely on your address. You don't have an opportunity to choose who your provider is. This could change that. This could change this for everyone, or what the industrial customers are looking at is change it solely for the industrial customers and commercial customers. So what does that mean? That could really flip our market on its head. People being able to buy energy from whoever they want. But where are the customer protections on that, and the consumer protections? That's where things can get a little dicey around kind of the guardrails, making sure that people are protected and not being preyed upon. I don't know how frequently folks shop for insurance, but it's not something that I enjoy doing. And I imagine it's going to be very similar for electric utility service. So we want to make sure that there is a way that folks can get power without being put in a very risky situation. And that's something that happened in Texas during Winter Storm Uri, and something that we need to be very careful about in Louisiana. That said, it could be a great opportunity to bring in more competitive prices and renewable energy and kind of build out that market. But it's something to approach with great caution. So just kind of throwing that out there, but that is the big picture. And I think we're looking at like a 5-year timeframe on that. Keep in mind with industrial customers, I know we touched on the Climate Initiatives Task Force, and we know industrial emissions are the biggest contributor of greenhouse gases in the state. And we know that a lot of them have sustainability goals. So they are looking towards buying a renewable power. The problem with that is that, Entergy has built quite an impressive gas fleet for these utility customers and continues to do so. So we want to make sure that residents aren't kind of left on the hook should Walmart opt out of the system. So something to really consider, big pieces to that docket. We also submitted comments, and they're on our website. We're happy to share if folks are interested. But just by the definition of kind of customer-centered options, what does that mean? Does that mean kind of a percentage of the income to determine your bill? Does that mean robust energy efficiency programs? Does that mean community solar? I think we need to be really creative and think outside of the box around what some of these customer-centered options are. It's not just, I want to shop around for my own power, but what do we want from our utility provider? I think those things need to really be considered in this docket. And then MISO. This might seem pretty urgent and has been urgent over the past few weeks, but it looks like it's much more of a long-term piece. As many folks are probably aware, we are part of MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. And this is an energy market that runs all the way up to Canada and down to Louisiana. There's a little bit of a bottleneck between the MISO North and MISO South, right around Arkansas and Tennessee. And that has created quite a bit of friction within the MISO market, as well as with Southern regulators. Basically, the grid needs to be upgraded. And the question is, who's going to pay for it? And in Louisiana at the LPSC, there's at least one regulator that is very hesitant to pay for these upgrades, regardless of the benefits. And that's something that we do know, is that the benefits far outweigh the costs, and we need to look at the big picture, not just the costs. We also need to look at different revenue streams for upgrading the costs. But what we really need to watch out for is shutting this conversation down. Said commissioner shutting this conversation down around the costs. We want to stay part of MISO. We know there's a lot of benefits. When we develop our solar market in Louisiana, we can sell that solar power into the market and keep the lights on in Minnesota when they're facing a cold weather snap. And likewise, they can send their power down to Louisiana. It's going to keep the costs the lowest possible and make sure that we are running on the most efficient resources. So it's really important to stay within MISO, and it's really important to engage, or at least encourage the commission to engage at MISO to make sure that we have access to some of these low-cost resources. So here's some big opportunities. We talked a little bit about kind of the engagement and how we need to really kind of build this groundswell at the Public Service Commission. So one thing that I'm really excited about is the new leadership at the LPSC, and this came out of the January meeting. So every January, the commissioners elect a new chair of the LPSC. And this year they elected Commissioner Boissier. He's the New Orleans River Parish commissioner, and he's going to be the new chair of the LPSC. That chair role, what we saw in the past year from Commissioner Green, who held that position, was really a leadership role in kind of guiding the conversation at the Public Service Commission and kind of reaching across the aisle or across the dais to guide this conversation and foster a little bit more of a collaborative dialogue. So this is really important to work with the chair, and it's exciting to see Commissioner Boissier take this role. Another piece is the MISO representative, or OMS is frequently referred to. It's MISO states is the OMS. I want to say operation, but it's the OMS of rep, and that is Commissioner Green now. So that's really exciting to have kind of his leadership at MISO, going back to what I was talking about before of why it's so important to stay in MISO and important to engage in this kind of grid buildup and upgrades. We want to make sure that we have good representation with MISO. Organization of MISO states, OMS is what it's called. So there's some real opportunities to kind of put some pressure on these commissioners and to work closely with them with open dialogue. That's another piece I touched on at the beginning around kind of who the commissioners are, but we want to make sure that we're holding the commission accountable and making sure that they are following through on things that they say. As I mentioned, this is often treated as a part-time job, and we want to make sure that they are doing what they signed up to do. Which brings me to elections. So what we really want to make sure is that these seats are not unopposed in some of these elections. That's common at the Public Service Commission, is these commissioners run unopposed. And we want to make sure that we do have a good candidate pool there so that we can ask the hard questions and we can get the good answers and the good results and the policies that we want, especially when so much is at stake regarding the Climate Initiatives Task Force and Louisiana's energy future. We want to make sure that we have somebody in there that is working for us and following through on the promises made along the campaign. So District 3 and 4 are up this year up for election. And then if you need a little bit more time to prepare, District 2 is coming up in 2024. So something to think about if you're interested, if you know somebody who's interested, there's plenty of training opportunities out there to kind of hone in your skill and develop that up. And then the last thing is just kind of the education and public engagement. We frequently joke that the LPSC is one of the most powerful elected offices that nobody knows about. And it's true. What we need is for folks to kind of be talking about the LPSC, be engaging with the commissioners, and letting folks know that there is an opportunity to do this. One thing that kind of just drives me nuts about the LPSC is that it's almost set up to be intimidating to regular folks. And that's not how it should be, right? This is a public forum, and these are elected officials making decisions for us. And we need to make sure that we're all empowered to engage and have those conversations and ask those questions, but that we also kind of lift up our friends and allies to do the same, because there's nothing to be intimidated about here. It's just a process. There's no stupid questions, and although sometimes they might make you feel like you asked a stupid question, it is 100% your right to do so, and I encourage everybody to engage on that. Frequently, the Alliance is one of the few kind of community voices at the LPSC, and that really needs to change so that we can kind of create visibility here. And I think because it is so insulated in times, that you know, a little move makes a big splash. So here's kind of how to engage at the LPSC. They have monthly meetings. They're called B&E, stands for Business and Executive Sessions. And they're usually on the third Wednesday of the month, but they've been kind of rearranged a little bit this year with some scheduling conflicts. You can just kind of attend and listen in, observe, see what goes on. As I mentioned, they're also on the YouTube channel. So if you can't make it to Baton Rouge, you can join in on the YouTube channel. Call, email, and meet with commissioners. I almost took off email because they don't like that a whole lot, but a personal email I think would go a long way. Avoid, you know, the forum emails. That's not going to work, but personal emails, faxes, they like their faxes. And just kind of reach out to your commissioner, to another commissioner, things like that, and create that dialogue, whether it's with their staff or the commissioner himself. These commissioners don't get a whole lot of calls and emails from their constituents. So a little goes a long way on this. You can intervene in the dockets. We have a template on our website that you can download and adjust, or just file as an interested party and kind of get on the email list. You can also attend the technical conferences, which I think is really interesting. As I mentioned, a lot of the rulemakings have technical conferences following a round of written comments. So even if you don't submit written comments, if you're not an intervener and you just want to go sit in and hear of other people's positions, other stakeholders' positions, to see the lay of the land and meet the LPSC crew. It is an LPSC crew. You can just kind of sit in on the technical conferences and hear kind of where the positions are of different folks, and kind of familiarize yourself and get a lay of the land on that. And that's just about it. So I don't know if there's questions. I see a couple of chats up here, but here's information of how to get in touch. And then tomorrow, this Wednesday, is the B&E meeting, and it's actually in Metairie. So it's a lot more convenient than Baton Rouge. From 10 a.m. Usually they go about 2 to 3 hours, but again, it's a public meeting, so come and leave when you need to. Looks like Ben, you raised your hands. Let's see. I'll start with you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. 2 quick questions. You know, when Entergy was pushing the new power plant in New Orleans East, their big push was, during a storm, we'll have our own source of energy. Well, that didn't seem to work out too well, did it? And the other question I have is, I was reading an article the other day where a lot of groups who are well-meaning are pushing nuclear energy as clean energy because it doesn't directly contribute to greenhouse gases, which is true directly. But however, the nuclear waste is around for God knows how long, and also in the process, many Indian reservations where this is dug up, people are suffering from cancers. So anyway, is that still looked upon, not so much by the Alliance for Affordable Energy, but is that still looked upon as, in quotation marks, clean energy?
I think that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of layers to that, to be really honest with you. I think to an extent, it's looked upon as clean energy because there are the same emissions associated with it. But it's really just kind of looking at it from an existing resource standpoint. The big barrier to nuclear power right now is just the cost. I think that is a huge deterrent with utilities and regulators alike, is that it's very expensive to build new nuclear power plants. I think we've seen examples of this multiple places where projects just didn't even get off the ground. They were approved and everybody, ratepayers, threw millions of dollars at a project that didn't serve anybody and just kind of fizzled out. So I think there's some big hesitancy on building new nuclear for those reasons. But because we have these existing resources that we've already paid so much for, I think there is an inclination for regulators to leverage that as clean energy. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I think that's kind of where you're seeing the dichotomy there and kind of some of those imbalances between accounting it as clean energy and looking more towards traditional wind and solar. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think there's a very broad conversation to have around kind of developing that out. But I guess that's kind of where I see it at this point.
All right, thank you.
I see in the chat, has the LPSC expressed interest in developing an RPS? They have. They have. So we have this renewable energy pilot program rider, which is pretty old. It was great when it happened, but now it just needs to be updated. So it's kind of like an add-on for renewable energy. Whereas, you get an extra 2 cents per kilowatt hour if it comes from renewable resources. But I think there is a little bit of an appetite for an RPS, especially coming out of Foster Campbell's office and Commissioner Boissier's office. They've talked about it. We've raised it in our comments around green tariffs and customer-centered options. It failed to meet the scope, but it's something that I think they're looking at much more seriously as a renewable portfolio standard. That said, there's a little bit of a caveat there, is that we want to make sure that it's actually a renewable portfolio standard. The commission likes to incorporate things like biomass into renewable energy. And we want to make sure that this is that we have an opportunity to define what a renewable portfolio standard is, and not just an opportunity for carbon capture and sequestration or biomass, things like that, but really that it is for solar and wind, developing a path for offshore wind and developing a market for it. But I do really believe that the Public Service Commission is going to explore an RPS in the near future. And so the push there would be to make sure that it is actually an RPS, not just an RPS in name. Well, we're coming up on time. We got about 2 minutes. So if there's any lingering questions, any shy folks out there, now's your time, or you're gonna have to email us.
Yeah, let me say thank you for doing this. It's very educational. But I lived here since 1982 when it was an OPSI. And it's a shame that we're going to have to get a rate increase to pay for damage to the grid but maybe the grid would have had more resiliency if over the years, if they would have kept up doing it when they should have been doing it. Would you say that's a true statement?
Possibly, which brings up another interesting point with our last minute is that is also something the commission is looking into, is how often are these polls and systems looked at? Can that be done more efficiently? Can that be done better? It's unclear to me if that's going to roll into the resiliency dockets or not, but there is a lot of reporting requirements coming out of that. And it appears that some of the, the smaller utilities are checking on their polls a little bit more frequently than some of the larger ones that suffered the bigger damage. I don't know if there's a correlation there, but I think it's something that the commission is looking into is did the utilities miss an opportunity to maintain their polls? So I think if those are questions and concerns that folks have, I highly encourage you to kind of follow along on some of those rulemakings and or reach out to commissioners, because that is a huge concern. We have a really big opportunity coming out of these storm seasons to kind of build out on a future where energy works for everyone. Well, thank you all for coming. It was lovely to have y'all. And then this has been recorded, so you can always watch it later if you need something to do early in the morning. And we look forward to engaging with you and seeing all of your lovely faces at the Public Service Commission. So I will end it there. Take care, everyone, and have a good night.